thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk with you about one of the things that I'm very passionate about, which is harvester ants. And this is a lovely setting to actually give a talk. I'm really very pleased and honored here to be able to talk here at the Prescott Natural History Institute. I'm an evolutionary ecologist, and I'm going to tell a story tonight about the evolutionary ecology of the western harvester ant. Let me see if I got these working. Yes. The best encapsulation, or at least my favorite encapsulation of what evolutionary ecology is all about, comes from the title of a little book of essays by the great ecologist G. Evelyn Hutchinson, The Ecological Theater and the Evolutionary Play. The evolutionary change takes place in the context of evolutionary situation of an organism, the environment of the organism. The evolutionary play this evening is going to be looking at the adaptations in the life cycle of the western harvester ant. That didn't work. This worked. This is the ecological theater for this study. This is our study site in western Colorado, where Diane Werniss and I have been studying this species for the last 33 years, okay? Now, why did we choose to study this ant? And maybe, in general, why would anyone study ants at all? Maybe they're ecologically important. And yes, they certainly are. Social insects are ecologically important. They may be the dominant predator or herbivore in a particular environment, but you know, it's also true that there are a lot of ecologically important species. Maybe they're the source of fascinating adaptations, and that's certainly true. There are amazing co-adaptations between leafcutter ants and the fungi that they cultivate, but nature is full of fascinating adaptations. And so those are not really the most important thing. The most important thing, the reason that scientists from Aristotle to half of the people in this room have continued to study social insects, the overwhelmingly important fact about social insects is that they're social. That's why I put it in bigger type, okay? The social insects are uniquely important because they're so highly social. For the social insect that I'll be talking about, western harvester ant, it's probably more important that it's social than that it's an insect, okay? That's the most important, interesting thing. So where are we going this evening? The first thing I want to do is ask the question, how do we think about life and death in social insects? And this is basically reflecting on the idea that life and death have a little bit of a different meaning for social insects than they do for solitary organisms. Mostly this is going to be about the life cycle of social insects. Why do some colonies succeed and other colonies fail? And this is going to be largely about thinking of the value of genetic diversity within colonies. And finally, how does colony success alter the life cycle? Here, we're talking about how the colonial life cycle and colony success are going to alter patterns of longevity and aging. Okay. Now, I want to start talking about the unusual, the important, and the frankly somewhat weird life cycle of social insects by talking about something completely different. This is a cactus wren, okay? It's a solitary animal, and everything that you really need to know about cactus wrens, I'm not going to put that quite right, I don't want to offend cactus wren fans, but you can find out pretty much everything about a cactus wren by following individual cactus wrens. They grow up, they mate, they lay eggs, they raise babies, and eventually they die, okay? And they don't all lay the same number of eggs, and they don't all live the same amount of time, but if you look at a bunch of individual cactus wrens, you'll find out what cactus wrens do. Now this is turned inside out when you study social insects. This is a queen of a harvester ant, and she does not do all of those things. She lays eggs, and those eggs usually become workers. And often that's just about all she does, okay? It's the workers who find the food. It's the workers who build the nests. It's the workers who raise the young, okay? And when those workers die, the colony continues on, pretty much unperturbed by the death of this individual, okay? The death of a worker is not necessarily advantageous to a colony, but it's entirely expected. This is supposed to happen. In the life cycle of a social insect, there are generations upon generations of workers who succeed one another, do their things, and then die, okay? The colony persists through those many generations. Now, for an evolutionary ecologist, this is the most important thing. This is the life cycle. It's, at its core, pretty simple. You know, adults make offspring, and offspring grow up to become adults. Deep scientific insight here, okay? We want to know how many offspring an adult produces, and what are the processes that go on to make to produce adults from offspring. But those could be, you know, an oak tree that makes acorns, and those acorns that grow up to become oak trees, or a butterfly that lays eggs, and those eggs hatch and turn into larvae and eventually turn into monarch butterflies, okay? Now, this is a colony of harvester ants in the lab, housed in a petri dish. The queen is right here. She's a little bit bigger than the workers, but not enormously bigger. These colonies, these colony is just going about its business. The queen lays eggs. They hatch into small larvae. The larvae grow, and eventually they pupate, and they become workers. And the workers do not directly contribute anything to furthering the life cycle, directly furthering the life cycle of this organism. And this is radically different from, I don't know, a cactus wren or an oak tree or a butterfly. The workers don't make a direct contribution to the next generation. It's all through their mother, the queen. Okay? But the queen can't possibly survive without those workers. She can't reproduce without those workers. These workers are not independent of one another. They form a coherent, interacting set of organisms that persist as a superorganism throughout the life of this harvester ant. The workers basically form the body of this superorganism. The more the workers, the bigger the body of this superorganism. And the queen is the reproductive tissue in this superorganism. So when you make that simple graph, the way it should look is not, you know, queen produces eggs which produce queens. It's, this is the adult colony, who produces new winged gines, winged queens, And those queens produce workers, and those workers contribute to the growth of the colony, and they build up to larger and larger sizes until you have an adult colony that can reproduce. And it's within that sort of superorganism life cycle that the evolutionary changes occur. Okay? So this is a photo of our study site in western Colorado. It's an area of hills and washes. The habitat type is called adobe badlands. The dominant vegetation are woody chenopodes like saltbush and greasewood, or woody composites like sagebrush or rabbitbrush, a few species of bunch grass. This is the Colorado Plateau Desert. Okay. We get at a rainfall amount that's a little bit more than Phoenix and a little bit less than Tucson, if you think of it in those terms. Okay. This is a map of our study site. Pogonomyrmex occidentalis is the western harvester ant, is extremely abundant at this site. The blue dots are the mapped positions of colonies at our study site. Okay? It's clearly the most dominant species of ant at our study site. Over the last 30 years, the population size of pogos at our study site has about 1,250 colonies in any given year, but it varies from 900 and something to 1,500 and something, so a little bit of variability. Each year of our study, we have some core activities that we perform. We check out every living colony to see if it's still living so that we can measure mortality rates. We carefully search every square meter of this study site to find particularly one-year-old colonies, and those form the basis of our known age colonies, so we can understand something about how long colonies live and how they age and so on. And we measure the sizes of all the workers at our study site. Study site's about 28 hectares, and for reference, this scale bar is half a kilometer. The colonies themselves, and this is the star here of the show, the nests of the western harvester ant extend quite a bit underground, 3 or more meters. Okay? But on top of the ground, there is a nest cone, which, in addition to being really attractive, I think, and it's really kind of a beautiful architecture, it has dimensions which correlate very strongly with the number of workers in the colony, so that when I say something about size, what I'm talking about is the size of the nest cone, which we've measured. Okay? These nest cones are, the biggest ones are maybe 1.5 meters in diameter and 1/3 of a meter tall. Okay? Now, harvester ants are seed harvesters by trade. They pick up fallen seeds that drop off of plants, but they also go up into the plants and cut seeds out of the vegetation. Okay, and they bring those seeds back to the colony. Okay, interestingly, the adult worker ants or the queen can't actually eat the seeds. So what they do is they peel the seed coats off of the seeds and grind them up and feed them to the larvae. Okay, so that's what's going on with seed harvester ants. They have some species that they prefer, but they actually harvest seeds from a lot of species. These are a bunch of species of seeds from our study site that the ants take. One of the really important things about seed harvester ants is that in addition to eating seeds, they also disperse those seeds. Ants are They bring them back to the nest, but they're not always completely successful. They often drop the seeds, and bingo, that dispersed those seeds. Okay, they're one of the dominant dispersers of seeds in deserts. Okay. Now, I want to take a real quick tour through a shortened version of the life cycle of this species. And here we're starting with the adult, okay, an adult mature colony that produces alates. These are winged reproductives, winged males, and winged new queens. We call them gines. Okay. They fly out of the nest, never to return, fly up onto the top of hills to mate, and then a single queen will found a colony. This is a first-year-old, one-year-old colony. Those colonies grow up over a number of years to become mature reproductive colonies. The part of the life cycle that's here on the top takes place over, really kind of hours. And the part of the life cycle here on the bottom takes place over decades. Okay, so there's definitely a time shift here. Okay, so let's take a look at this life cycle in a bit more detail. Okay. I know where I am. Let's look at this isolated colony of harvester ants. It doesn't really look like there's anything going on here. But down underneath the surface, the queens are starting to be produced. They're produced in the spring of the year, okay? And they're ready and mature and willing to fly by sometime in June. The monsoonal rains make it up to western Colorado in mid-July, late July, and if there's sufficient rain, that will trigger the emergence of all of the reproductives from all of the colonies in the area all at once. Okay? At 2:45 in the afternoon, on the day after this rainstorm, all of the winged reproductives fly out of a nest. Okay? And they fly to hilltops, where they mate in vast mating swarms. Okay? And on the ground on these mating swarms, you can find balls of ants rolling around. And they look like balls of just males, but if you peel them off, you'll find that within that ball, there's a gine, a queen. And all of those males are competing vigorously with one another to mate with this female. Okay? And the female lets them mate, and then she also terminates those matings by biting the abdomens of the males to make them let go. Okay? The males just die up on those hilltops. Okay? We'll forget about them for now. Okay? The queens, the newly mated females, fly off of those hills, and they land, they shed their wings, they run around and look for a place to dig a hole, to start a colony. And this is one digging. The hole is back here, but this little part is a mouthful of dirt that she's excavated from the hole. Okay. On the day after a mating swarm, you can go out into the desert and see, hundreds or thousands of, what did I do? I did that. Hundreds or thousands of queens frantically digging, okay? And it's urgent that they get below ground as quickly as possible because it's the middle of the summer and it's the desert and the soil surface temperatures climb to above 60 degrees very rapidly, okay? And they just fry out there if they don't get deep enough, quick enough. This is a map of about 2,000 sites where queens are trying to initiate colonies. Okay? They don't spread themselves out just uniformly. Okay? You can see that there's clumps of queens, very dense areas where many, many queens are trying to start colonies at almost exactly the same spot. Okay. They like to dig in soft soils, and so does every other queen, and so they tend to congregate in certain areas. You may get 2 queens trying to start a colony within 2 centimeters of each other. Okay. There's not a very great success rate for queens founding colonies. If you look at the number of new colonies that are formed by the queens that were digging the previous summer, it's these red dots. 98% of the queens die. 2% of them are successful. Okay. The reason that they die, many of them die probably because they can't get underground fast enough, and they do just desiccate. But there are many ways for a queen to die. And there's an enormous amount of chance involved in figuring out who survives and who dies. Okay? But we do know a couple of things. First of all, isolated queens are more successful. If you look at all of those big blotches of many queens digging at one location, you don't ever see any red spots there. It's because there's almost no chance that queens that are trying to start nests in close proximity with other queens will be successful. They're extremely aggressive to one another, and they will, mutually kill one another. Okay. If you have a nearby neighbor, your chance of being successful is less than 0.5%. If you're actually isolated from a neighbor, you still don't have a great probability of surviving. 95% of them die, but I guess that's 10 times greater than if you had a near neighbor. Okay, so maybe it makes a difference. We also know that bigger queens survive better. Queen size can vary because their mother colony that produced these queens invested more stuff, nutrients, energy, into producing a bigger queen. Okay? And the bigger the queen, the greater her survival. Okay? There's very strong selection on colonies to produce queens that are much, that are unusually large. Okay. Why do large queens have an advantage? It's a little hard to know. Perhaps they're better at getting underground faster. That makes sense. Perhaps they have more stored resources. That makes sense. Perhaps they're bigger and more able to beat up their neighboring aggressive ants. That makes sense too. It's all possible. Now, when a queen is successful, when she's one of those 2% who are the most successful queens, they will end up producing this. It's a 1-year-old colony. It's a little tiny colony. Okay? And these little tiny colonies are subject to the same sort of chance events as queens are. But you remember, this is the top 2% of the best, Things are very difficult for small colonies. Many things can kill them. They're subject to diseases. They can die from fungal pathogens. They have a lot of predators that can kill them. If they have start a nest near another big aggressive colony, that colony is just going to wipe them out. They can starve to death. Yeah, a prairie dog could just decide to dig right here, and it just obliterates a colony, okay? A lot of chance events can kill a little tiny colony. But if they're lucky, another round of luckiness, they might be able to add a few more workers, make a little bigger nest, collect more food, add more workers, and produce a somewhat bigger nest, okay? Now, there's a lot of variability in how colonies grow. These are rapidly growing colonies. This is a trajectory of the growth of the size of colonies over the first 10 years of their life, okay? They start out small, and these are growing rapidly, and they get really pretty big here pretty quickly. These colonies are actually quite large. The very, very largest colonies you see are this size 13, okay? When colonies are capable of reproducing, they have to get up to a size of about 10, okay? Just as a sort of rule of thumb, okay? One of those colonies got there in its second year. Others, more of them by age 3, and everybody was big enough to reproduce by the time they're 4 years old, and that's really fast for this species. Then, there are other colonies. They grow more slowly. Let's just trace this particular colony. Can you see the red dot? Okay. Trace this colony back to its original size, and you can see that it's the same size when it's 10 years old as it was when it was 1 year old. This colony just doesn't grow very fast, okay? And none of these colonies ever got to a size where it's probable that they could reproduce, even when they're 10 years old. And we know of colonies that are 20 years old that just have stayed small and have never gotten large enough to reproduce. Now, if this is a successful tiny colony, okay, and it's able to grow, eventually something remarkable happens. And to understand that, we have to go back to the day when the queen flew to the hilltop and mated. Okay. The queens that go up to these hilltops and mate don't all mate the same number of times. Okay. Some of them mate twice. Some of them mate 15 times. On average, the queens mate about 8 times, as it turns out. And we know this because we've genotyped the workers from hundreds of colonies, and we find that, yes, they all have the same mom, that's the queen, but they might have, 2 fathers, in which case they belong to, the lineage from one male or the other male. Or they might have 15 fathers, in which case it's this big kaleidoscope of a colony, okay? The more times that a queen mates, the greater the genetic diversity there is within the colonies that they produce. Colonies where the queen mated 15 times have enormous amounts of genetic diversity. Colonies where the queen mated twice, some, but not nearly as much. And this is important because genetic diversity leads to colony success. And how does this work? Okay. We're back to cactus wrens. But what I want to do is talk about an individual organism compared to a colonial organism here. This cactus wren, has a bunch of traits. Maybe it's bill length. It has a certain length of bill, okay? And because it has a certain length of bill, it can do a certain sort of set of things. If it had a shorter bill or a longer bill, it could do slightly different things, okay? But it doesn't. It has whatever length of bill it has, okay? Now, if we look at a colony of organisms, this colony of ants, which in this case may only have a queen, be produced by a queen and one male, okay, it's still a family. And within this family, it is possible for there to be variability among the members of that family, okay? The worker mandibles might be different sizes, kind of keeping with the mouth parts theme here, okay? And there may be greater variability. There in fact has to be greater variability among the workers within a family than within one single cactus wren, okay? Now, if the queen mates 15 times, she's got an enormous amount of potential genetic variability to work with. There can be a lot of variation within the colony in the characteristics of the workers that make up that colony that might give the colony a greater ability to deal with some sort of ecological variation. Now, it doesn't have to be, mandible size variation. It could be behavioral variation. Perhaps there's some individual workers there who might vary in activity levels or aggressiveness or their ability to find food, okay? And it gives colonies with greater genetic diversity a potential leg up, okay? To sort of figure out how this might work, we did an experiment, okay, where we looked at how genetic diversity, okay, influences the fate of colonies early in life. So what we did was to construct colonies, about 500 of them, that differed in the number of times that the queen mated. Anywhere from 1 to, we went up to 10, okay? And then we grew them till they're the size of those little colonies that we saw. And we planted them back out into nature, okay? And then we followed them, okay? In the first year, a bunch of colonies died, okay? But there was no relationship between how they died and how many times the queen mated. The survival was the same, regardless of whether they mated a few times or a lot of times. Second year, that's also true. But in the third year, something remarkable happens, okay? There's a relationship now between how many times the queen mated and how well the colony survived. And this was true in year 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, okay? Colonies where the queen mates more commonly will survive better, but they have to get through this very vulnerable small stage. When the colony gets to large enough colony size, those benefits gradually accumulate until we suddenly see their expression after a few years. Okay. Now, how could genetic diversity lead to increased survival? Okay. I'm going to try to convince you, and I think it's probably easy because it makes perfect sense to me, but that there's a direct causal pathway between foraging, here's a bunch of workers foraging on seeds, and fitness, the success in terms of reproduction and survival of colonies. Okay. We've studied the foraging behavior of harvester ant colonies. And one of the things that we find is that not all colonies forage for the same amount of time. Some forage for less time, some forage for greater amounts of time, okay? When they forage for greater amounts of time, not surprisingly, they bring in more seeds, which means they have more food and they have increased growth. The colony size grows. And when colony size grows, they get bigger. I guess that's what growth is. You get bigger, okay? And when you get bigger, you survive better. And when you survive better, you live longer. okay? And when you live longer, you have more opportunities to reproduce, and you have greater lifetime reproductive success. The key thing here is that genetic diversity of a colony influences all of these traits of harvester ants. When you look at when you look at colonies with great genetic diversity, which means that the queen mated more times, those colonies forage for longer during the day, okay? Colonies that have greater genetic diversity because the queen mated more times grow faster. They get to be bigger sizes. We just saw that they have greater survival, okay? They live longer, and they have greater lifetime reproduction. Genetic diversity is kind of the cure-all for increasing fitness in harvester ant colonies. It's actually an amazingly sort of broad feature that increases colony success. Okay. Now, I said that there's increased survival and greater longevity here. Given the fact that, we've been talking about longevity here, colony lifespan, what is the lifespan of a colony? How long do they live? The workers live about a year, okay? So the age of workers in a colony is pretty much the same when the colony is 5 years old, or 10 years old, or older, because the workers live the same amount of time. But how long does the harvester ant queen live? Let's take a look at the survivorship curve for colonies, okay? As I said, when we monitor our site every year, we are especially interested in locating all of the first-year colonies at the study site, okay? That means that we have, right there, an individual whose age we know, okay? So we start with 3,200 known age colonies, and a number of them die early on, but a number of them have lived for as long as we've been studying this ant species, 33 years. And we can be absolutely sure that they live for quite a bit longer than that, because we started looking at this population 33 years ago with 1,000 colonies. As of this summer, there are 149, about 15% of the original 1,000 colonies still alive. Okay, they've lived for 33 years, plus however long they were alive before we started. Okay, how long was that? Well, honestly, we don't know for sure, but we can make estimates for how long, on average, they were alive before, and it turns out to be 10 years. So we expect that the colonies of this harvester ant, and by extension, the queens, live for, 40, 45 years, at least. Okay. When we look out on the landscape at our study site, and we regard the animals that live out there, prairie dogs, coyotes, pronghorn antelope, every other insect. The animal that lives the longest out there is a harvester ant queen. Okay. The only thing that might be a challenger are golden eagles, who actually only live about 30 years. So harvester ants queens have them beat. Okay. which I find to be kind of a sobering notion. Let's not forget that what the queen did in one time during her life was mate, okay? During that one day, one afternoon, when she was mating, okay? Since then, she has stored the sperm of all of the males that she mated with, and she's doled them out a few at a time to produce offspring, okay? And after 40 years, she has managed to keep those sperm alive and active and viable, which I think is a kind of a remarkable thing, given that if we're trying to store sperm, we can freeze them in liquid nitrogen or something like that and keep them for, a year or two, but this queen is doing it at, well, I don't know, room temperature, I guess, for a queen, whatever that is, and has no trouble storing them for 40 years. Okay, this is one of those, I think, remarkable facts which doesn't have an adequate explanation currently. Okay. Now, so why do colonies die if they live so long? Perhaps these queens run out of sperm. If they run out of sperm, they can't make any more workers, and the whole colony declines, and then it would die. And that's possible. The supply of sperm is not unlimited, so the queen can't live forever. Okay. But time and chance happen to them all, and perhaps the queens just get old, they age, and eventually they die. And in the last twist that I want to share with you this evening, this turns out not to be true. Queens don't age. They don't senesce. So what do we mean when we say that an animal senesces? And we mean two things, actually. Let's take a look at humans. This is the mortality rate as a function of age, and this is kind of the age of first reproduction, alarmingly around 15 years. And this is when humans experience about their lowest mortality levels, okay? But mortality increases slowly, but it increases at an accelerating rate as we age. Okay, this is called mortality senescence. Okay? There's an effect on fecundity as well. Fecundity starts here at the age of first reproduction. It increases for a while, and then it falls until it reaches the age of last reproduction. And this is called fertility senescence. Okay? Harvester ants have neither mortality nor fertility senescence. If you look at the mortality rate of queens, as a function of age, from the age of about first reproduction, it continuously falls throughout life instead of rising, reaching, for the oldest group of colonies that we have, 95% of them survive over a course of a year. It's only a 5% mortality rate, okay? They don't show any mortality senescence. Same thing happens with reproduction. Here, at the age of first reproduction, there's a slight chance of reproducing, but it increases continuously as colonies get older. Blip. And it has a high rate of reproduction even among the very oldest colonies. Now, there are other organisms that look like this, because harvester ants and these organisms do things differently from the way we do it. Instead of it being senescence, we call it negative senescence. They sort of do the opposite of senescence. There's some fish, some turtles, a wide variety of plants that actually showed negative senescence. These other organisms have some traits in common with harvester ants, primarily having indeterminate growth. That is to say, they keep growing after they start reproducing. Okay. Harvester ants do that as well, but it's not quite the same way as these solitary organisms do. They do it in a social way. Instead of having increasing body size as after they start reproducing, well, they increase the body size if this is the body. You know, they increase the colony size. Workers are added to colonies after colonies begin to reproduce. But there are a number of ways in which sociality can favor, social behavior can favor negative senescence. One of the most intriguing is the idea that the body of the organism, the body of the colony, the workers in the colony, don't really age. They remain young. It's not the same individuals. They're replaced year after year after year, but the whole body, the soma of this organism, is replaced annually. Bigger colonies survive better, and bigger colonies reproduce more. The largest colonies, actually make the greatest contributions, and these tend to be the older colonies. They make the greatest contributions to the next generation. And queens, the queen, who's the reproductive organ in this colony, doesn't really have to do that much, honestly. She's getting older as the colony gets older, but she doesn't have to find food. She doesn't have to raise young. She doesn't have to avoid predators. You know, the way a cactus wren has to deal with annual variation and storms, she doesn't have to worry about that. She basically puts these tasks off onto her permanently youthful workers. Okay. So, we've made a tour through the life cycle of this organism. And so what kind of conclusions can we draw here? You might be having thoughts about me and thinking that monomania might be one of the things that would describe somebody who would study a single organism for 33 years. Okay, but we'll leave that aside. But two things have emerged that are really couldn't be known without spending a lot of time looking at the life cycle of this organism. First is the outstanding longevity of the queens. It would be difficult to have discovered that without a long-term study. It's unlikely that just because we found out that harvester ant queens live for a very long time, that we've somehow discovered the longest lived ant queen, okay? It's very likely that people will continue to discover queens of social insects who live even longer lifespans. Okay. Second thing is, hey, we've discovered the cure for aging, you know? It only requires that you produce sterile workers and that can do everything that needs to be done, and that you just sit there and lay eggs in the dark for 40 years. Okay? But I think more importantly, it focuses our attention. I must have done something. Did I do something? It's all. Okay. Storms? I don't know. It focuses our attention back on the evolution of senescence, the evolution of aging. We're forced to remember that aging is an evolved part of the life cycle. It's good to keep in mind that many of the phenomena of aging, okay, are the result of natural selection operating to increase the lifetime reproductive success of the organism, sometimes at the cost of increased mortality later in life. But if the circumstances of the life cycle change to favor delayed reproduction by larger organisms, larger colonies, okay, the balance could shift. And natural selection could favor the evolution of negative senescence, okay, as a mechanism to increase the number of offspring that are produced. Okay, and I want to leave you with a little portion of an XKCD cartoon. Ants are so cool. I am big on ants. Okay. So I want to thank the Prescott Natural History Institute for allowing me to talk. Many people have been involved in this study over the last couple of decades. Diane Wernes especially, and many of the funding agencies and people who were very helpful for us. So thank you very much for listening.
I think we have a moment or two to ask questions. And if you don't mind repeating the question, given the fact that this mic isn't working
Okay.
so well.
We'll give it a try.
Okay.
Yes. So I've had the pleasure to witness the nuptial flights, shortly after the first monsoons here in Prescott. And I've never seen though the clusters of mating ants. You mentioned hilltops.
The question is about mating flights around Prescott and after monsoonal rains, but you haven't ever seen the mating balls. I don't know what to tell you. Were they Pogonomyrmex? Yeah. So were they big red ants? Okay, so that's good. They probably were, because this is when, that describes when they fly. Were you at a hilltop? Roughly, okay. Did you look on the ground? I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. They do it all the time. We sometimes have left our car doors open or windows open, and the whole car gets filled with not only these flying ants, but these mating balls that just fall down everywhere. So we see it all the time. It's actually very nice. Question, yes?
As the mound gets bigger, is the queen making more eggs?
The question is, as the mound gets bigger, as the colony gets bigger, is the queen producing more eggs? Yes, she has to be. The colony sizes get up to be 20,000-ish at a very maximum, I would say. And they all have to turn over, annually. Plus, then they might reproduce, and so there's some reproduction there as well. So you have to make, 22,000 or something like that, new offspring. That's a lot of eggs, but it's not a huge and unimaginable number of eggs. They're not army ants that have to make like millions of workers. Yes, the queen does make more eggs as the colony gets bigger. Yes. Yes, sir.
All those millions of eggs she lays over 50 years are all from sperm from the first baby flight?
All of the offspring that she produces, the result of sperm that she stored for the entire 50 years and have used over that time period? And the answer is yes, absolutely.
Secondly, I used to work at White Sands National Park
Yeah?
in Mexico, 200 square miles of field. Out in the heart of the dunes, the dunes are moving so fast, vegetation could not finish that much. It was completely barren. And most of those inhabitants were some farmers who ran the colony. And apparently surviving just from the seeds and the babies and bugs put into those.
Wow.
That used to be research.
I don't know if I can repeat that comment, but that is an amazing story. I would love to see something like that. That's cool. That's, yeah, amazing. Yes, ma'am.
So why is there no noticeable diversity benefits over the first few years? Is total colony deaths and random causes outweighing diversity-related deaths in survival?
Why is there no genetic diversity benefits in the first few years? Is it chance factors that are outweighing that? Yes, that's exactly right. In fact, I mean, chance is always operating, but chance has a big effect on things that have very little capacity to buffer against chance. And little colonies just don't have much ability to resist chance things. So, you know, if you have greater genetic diversity, you can forage more and you can bring back more food and yada, yada, yada. But on the other hand, if there is a big colony nearby, it could just wipe you out. It doesn't matter how much genetic diversity you have. If a badger digs into your colony, you're dead. It doesn't matter how many times the queen made it. Okay?
Is there a chance that they can create like male clones of the fathers so that they can, or of the previous partners, so they can then remake with them and get more sperm? I think some species can do that. I'm not sure.
Can the colony or the queens perhaps do some sort of intricate mechanisms to recreate the males that are so that they'd be identical to the ones that they mated with? Now, see, the thing is, she produces males during the year. If she was capable of doing this other stuff to make a clone of a male, she would also be capable of just mating with the males that she's producing. I mean, if she wanted to do that. But they just don't. It is a sort of an unwavering fact of their life cycle that they simply won't mate. They don't remate. They only mate during that 2.5 hour period. And it's maybe possible for some other organisms to do that, but they just won't. They just won't do that. In the corner here. That would be you. Yes.
When the males and the females go out with their wings,
Uh-huh.
do they make an effort to mate with individuals from different colonies and not with individuals of their own colonies?
Do the queens and males avoid mating with members, other queens and males who come from the same colony, or are they trying to outbreed? Okay. I would say there's no evidence that they're avoiding mating with their brothers or sisters. Okay. There can be hundreds of thousands of males and winged females up at these mating swarms. And those alates go to the top of whatever is the highest thing around. And if you're standing up there, you are the highest thing around. And they will cover you. And there are, literally thousands, tens of thousands. Okay. It's very unlikely that a new queen from one colony would encounter a male from the same colony. But I don't think there's anything that prevents them from mating with a male from that same colony. In cases where there's, instead of hundreds of thousands, maybe tens of males and queens on these mating swarms, they may all come from one or two colonies. And then they can actually inbreed, okay? Males mating with, brothers mating with sisters. Okay, yeah. I'm not sure who was first on the ledge back there, I think.
Does the mineral composition of the soil have any kind of noticeable effect on the hives or the colonies?
Does the mineral composition of the soil influence anything about the colonies? So they definitely have, the harvester ants have definite preferences about the kinds of soils that they like to be in. As I was kind of mentioned, they like to be in sort of soft, deep soils of washes, okay? But they really hate hard, packed clay soils that that are often very high in selenium where we live. And so I don't know if it's exactly the mineral content, but they definitely have opinions about what is good soil to dig in and what's not. Yeah. And then,
Have you found any evidence of queens replacing queens within a colony?
do queens replace queens in a colony? No, they don't do that. Sometimes there's the phenomenon of queen supersedure or maybe queen succession in other species, but in our species, they just don't do that. Actually, we're really happy that they don't do that because it makes everything a lot easier. We don't have to worry about that. But we've looked at the sort of genetic makeup of colonies over an interval of 26 years, I think, in the wild, and they're the same. It's the same mom. The queen's the same after all this time. Yeah. Yes, ma'am, in the back. No, they stay there. They never have wings. You know, so the question is, when the colony is established, do they just stay in one place all the time? Okay, and the answer is yes, but they stay there almost all the time. Every once in a while, conditions conspire to have the colonies want to move. Maybe, we don't know exactly what the reasons are necessarily. They're too close to a competitor. Maybe the old nest gets filled with diseases. But whatever it is, they move. And they might move 2 meters. They might move 5 meters, okay? But they don't move very far. And so they can move, but they usually don't move very frequently, and they don't move very far. Yeah, they just kind of like, something happens, they don't like this colony anymore, and as few workers start going out and scouting out new places, and there's some digging goes on, and then it starts getting more digging, and you see workers moving back and forth between these two locations, and then they may just all move in one day, or they may take months to kind of figure it out, where they're just traveling back and forth, okay? But sometimes the colonies do move, yes. Sure. Yeah. What's the big, huge bare spot around the colonies? Well, they cut the vegetation around those colonies, around their nests. In the Pogo occidentalis, the western harvester ant, the nest is a cone shape, okay? And they bring their brood up, the immature ants, up into the cone during the early morning and take them back down when it gets too hot, and then they bring them back up sort of in evening. So they're moving their babies up and down to kind of take advantage of the natural heating properties of being in this sort of conical mount, okay? And they also clear out an area which lets sun hit those mounds earlier in the morning. warms them up. Okay. Oh, hi there. Hi, folks.
What does your cactus wren do for 2.5 hours on the day after the
Despondently flies around looking for ants to eat.
I think we have time for one more question. I think Blaine will stick around to answer other questions, but let's just get one more from the audience.
Somebody other than Bob and NAS people. Or Jurgen. Yes, ma'am.
Producing eggs
Right.
for 40 years.
Yes.
What's the percentage within 1 year of eggs that turn into workers, the eggs that turn into males? Because obviously there have to be some males
And then new queens.
and maybe
That's a really good question, and it's going to vary a lot. The queens maybe are just producing a bunch of eggs. Well, they produce eggs that they fertilize. Okay, they use a sperm to, let a sperm out of the spermatheca and fertilize an egg, and those become females. They also lay eggs that they don't fertilize, and those become males. A hidden thing that I did not sort of reveal to everybody here, okay? Those become males. Okay, so, but she's still producing eggs, okay, for both males and for females, okay? And the workers, okay, who are all females. Now, it may very well be that the queen just produces a bunch of eggs, a bunch of female eggs, okay, fertilized eggs. Those eggs they have a possibility of becoming a workers, or they have a possibility of becoming a queen. And in good years, where there's a lot of seed availability, they turn a lot of those female eggs down the pathway to becoming queens. And the queen doesn't do that, the workers do that. In bad years, like this is a bad year in western Colorado, there's no vegetation, there's no seeds, everybody's hurting, okay? Then those are not going to become new queens. They're just going to be workers. So year by year, it's going to vary a lot what fraction of those female eggs are going to become queens, and what fraction of those female eggs are going to become workers. But some fraction always has to be workers to replenish the whole colony every year.
So the workers decide who's going to be a worker, who's going to be a queen, but the queen decides who's going to be fertilized.
Yes, yes, exactly. This is such a cohesive, integrated unit that it's very easy to talk about it as a superorganism. Yeah. Yes. Right? Okay.
Join me in thanking Blaine. And in a sign of gratitude and part of our tradition, we give the presenter a Natural History Institute hat.
Huh? The coatis. It's a coati.
It's not an insect.
It's a coati. I had a choice. Well, you didn't have an ant. You had bumblebees, but, too bad, man. I'm going with coatis.